All right, this is Jonathan Hayat's fault. So step number 1, I was hoping that with my recent example, everybody would at least be able to get to the step 1, which was to be able to identify R.
I got
well,
this too.
In the notes, I showed you that R equals A2 divided by A1. So we need to make sure we know what A2 is and what A1 is. Well, here's A1, here's A2, here's A3, and so forth. So when identifying R, all I'm simply going to do is take 4 divided by -8. Now, you could rewrite that as a decimal, but I'm telling you guys, keep fractions. It's much easier to work your problem through with fractions. So therefore, this becomes -1/2. That is now my R. The next step was to write the equation. Well, remember, in the equation, we have a sub n equals a sub 1. I'll be moving in just a second, times r raised to the n minus 1. Now, we know what a sub 1 is, and we know what r is. And n represents any number in the sequence that we pick, right? So I just plug in a sub n equals a sub 1, which is -8, times r, which is a -1/2, raised to the n minus 1 power. And that's it. Very, very little math. The only math I asked you guys to do for steps 1 and 2 was to divide or reduce the fraction 4 over -8. That's it. Now, I'm not going to lie, step number 3, though, can bring in some difficulties. Step number 3 now asks, find a sub 8. Well, just like we did in the last 2 class periods, whenever we have a formula and we want to find that 8th term, we're going to plug in 8 in for n. Right? So whenever we have an 8 in for that n, I got to put an 8 up here. OK? So therefore, this becomes a sub 8 equals -8 raised to the -1/2 raised to the 7th power. Now, why do I like doing fractions rather than using, why would I like to use fractions rather than using decimals? No. The reason being is fractions, or especially fractions and powers, they have what we call the power to quotient property. And what this states, let's pretend this is a -1, that this is -1 to the 7th over 2 to the 7th. So when you have a fraction raised to a power, that means the numerator is raised to the power, as well as the denominator is raised to the power. So -1 to the 7th power is just going to give me -1. And then in my calculator, all I need to do is say, well, what is 2 raised to the 7th power? And that's 128. So -1/2 raised to the 7th, instead of it being some crazy decimal, because if I do that as a decimal, it's 0.0078125. It's like, why would you want to write down that decimal when you can just write 1 over 28? Or -1 over 28. So therefore, I have a to the 8th equals -8 times -1 over 128. The last thing about this, which makes it, again, preferable for this, is remember, guys, when you're multiplying a number times a fraction, you rewrite that number as a fraction, and you just multiply across. So here, I just rewrite this as a fraction, and now I just multiply across. So my negatives go to a +1, and my final answer is 8 over 128. And then, so I just multiplied -8 times -1 gives me +8. And then 1 times 128 is 1 over 28. Then I just say, well, I can reduce these. These are both even numbers, right? So I could divide them by 2. I could divide them by 4. You're never going to see this answer on a test when it's not reduced. So you're going to want to make sure you know how to reduce. So therefore, you reduce this. And what you notice is that the top and bottom can both be reduced by 8, which gives you a final answer of 1/16.
That's when you reduce it.
Yep.